A small Cambridge inn called the White Horse. The Reformation came.
Restless is raw, unscripted, reformed radio.
Ladies and gentlemen, the weekend.
So, Pastor Michael, I needed that final video clip celebrating the weekend. I was just telling Pastor Michael that it's not the video we're about to watch's fault, potentially how I'm going to react to it, but I am in a mood today. And so I'm happy to be here recording with Pastor Michael. Pastor Michael, apologize to all the people, and then we'll go on.
Yes, we're late because of me, everybody. I was at an estate sale. My wife and I took our oldest son, and we did a Valentine's Day estate sale.
Happy Valentine's Day.
Yes, it was so funny because my wife is not sentimental, and she doesn't I don't get her things for Valentine's Day. I know that sounds crazy. I know everybody thinks I'm a bad husband. My wife will tell you she doesn't want it. She just doesn't. She's very frugal, practical. She might want to pick something out. She might want to spend time together. She doesn't want me to go get something. But we went to this estate sale, and I bought a vintage women's coat, like pea coat, long coat kind of thing, to resell. And my wife was carrying it around, and these sweet old ladies were all like, "Oh, did you find that?" Or, "Oh," and then my wife was like, "No, it's, my husband found it. And he found it." And they're like, "Oh, is that your Valentine's Day gift?" And she just smiled. Nope, just to sell.
Well, I will be attempting. I always like to attempt to make something for my wife and I, obviously with our children. No, I mean, I will never try and I am unwilling. I am so practical. I'm unwilling to try and find a babysitter on the Valentine's Day Friday night. So instead, I'm going to try and make a lobster roll from home. So shout out to our East Coast listeners. We'll see how well I do.
Lobster roll, cool.
Because it's Valentine's Day, and I'm trying to set the right mood. The right mood. I've poured my drink into this fancy glass.
Hey, there you go.
Here's to you. But Pastor Michael, go ahead.
Well, I love it. I have no drink because I was running down here. If you saw where I was when I texted Matt, give me 4 to 5 minutes, I can't believe I made it as soon as I did.
So the good news is, for everyone joining us, we are about to do our Valentine's Day Complementarian reaction. And Pastor Michael, the people who are going to help us or give us the material to react to this year will be, once again, back to where we started, TGC. So Pastor Michael, many moons ago, we started when we laughed our way through a reaction to Dr. Tim Keller and Dr. Don Carson discussing what the Bible means. We're going to go to some of the young guns this year. It is a podcast they recorded called How Men and Women Must Labor Together for the Good of the Church, with Colin Hansen, Jen Wilkin, Corey Porter, and Dr. Michael Kruger. So it's the new generation, Pastor Michael.
Next
gen. As we know, TGC, like when we first started this complementarian organization, they are going to help us this Valentine's Day come up with and learn how men and women must. That's a must. That's what we call an imperative in your I just learned like 3 things about biblical interpretation. Must minister together. Now, Pastor Michael, as I mentioned, I'm in a mood, so apologies to TGC, depending on how filtered or unfiltered I am. And I will say, I watched 2 seconds of this video when I was looking for what we would react to. And in 2 seconds, I lost it 2 seconds in. And so we will stop it and talk about something 2 seconds in, so everyone knows. We are gonna record here for the next hour. And we will decide at the end of that if we should finish the video. Hopefully we make it further than 2 seconds in.
We might not. We've gotten to the point where we make zero promises about how far we make it in a video, because it probably won't be very far.
But Pastor Michael, let's kick off the weekend, kick off Valentine's Day. Pastor Michael gets nothing for his wife for Valentine's Day, but dear listener, he gets you a live stream every year. Maybe she's
this is for her.
Oh, this is her gift. This hour of recording.
Shout out to my wife, Emily. I love you. This is for you.
Dedication. I love it. We should start dedicating podcasts. So we will find out how Pastor Michael and Emily in love must minister together.
The family of God is essentially motherless, is not that women stop looking for a mother. They go and find a mother outside of the local church in the form of someone who they can find in a virtual space.
I think I'm going to stop you right there. As I mentioned, this is so Pastor Michael, and maybe this is relating to the kind of mood I'm in, so I don't, we're getting the high level, what are the tag clips coming out of this podcast we need to pay attention to. Jen Wilkham diagnosing the problem. The church is essentially motherless. Pastor Michael, let me take a moment and let me try and grant something. I grant that the need we probably have for just in general leadership in the church, she may be talking about some greater problem, and that's fine. But here's my thing. I would like to, as a church planter, I started church planting after it stopped being cool, and now people just insult people who do it on X, which is fine. But I can't even imagine thinking that the great problem we have is a motherless church when the church is so desperately in need of shepherds that maybe it's because the truth that Jesus says, how desperate the harvest needs laborers, to me is now my personal experience.
Yeah.
And were someone to come with a good plan to plant, let's say another Reformed church in Eau Claire, I couldn't imagine being I don't know if we need that. Because if you've actually tried at all to do what Christ has called you to, and I do not claim to be great at it, I do not claim to be a hero, but if you have tried at all, you go, wow, we are so far from what we need.
Drowning.
It's astounding.
We're drowning.
If you are a young man listening to this and would like to, Paul says it's a noble thing for you to desire, right? Come on. There is plenty of room and need. So I don't know if the church is motherless. I think it's basically shepherdless, though.
Shepherdless and fatherless, right? At least the cultural problem that we face right now is a lack of fathers, not a lack of mothers. There's actually a lot of mothers. Now, let me just grant that could she be pointing to, because it's a clip.
Yep.
I'll be the nuanced guy.
Great. You can be the nuanced guy. I'll be the mad guy.
Greater discipleship, right? Older women train up the younger women. And I assume that Jen Wilkin is going to say specifically, we need more women discipling younger women to love their husbands and to be keepers of the home. Like Paul says in Titus, I'm assuming the best. We know that's what Jen Wilkin, you're going to say. That's how women must minister alongside. Because I too, in no way want the older godly women in our church are certainly a gift to the other women in our church and our church in general, right? I do not want to denigrate that at all. But when it comes to this idea of the leadership vacuum, I can't imagine calling the church and in general American culture motherless. But let's get further in than my 2-second clip. I've gotten to say my piece. I've gotten to beg people to pray and join in the goals of shepherding.
Some elders operate, some pastors, not all, operate with a paradigm that has a view of men and women that I think negatively affects the shepherd.
I guess it helps us to see that we shouldn't be calibrating the biblical teaching to counterbalancing a cultural narrative, because the Bible itself is the norm.
Right.
The Bible itself is telling us what we should be doing.
It's the beautiful story.
It's the beautiful story.
Welcome to the Gospel Coalition podcast, equipping the next generation of believers,
Where are they recording this from? Sorry. Let's go. Let's get to
pastors,
this.
and church leaders to shape life and ministry around the gospel. Today is a special episode titled Partners in Ministry, How Men and Women Must Labor Together for the Good of the Church.
Welcome to the Gospel Coalition.
So, Pastor Michael, obviously they are recording in a very different kind of vibe than we are. You've got a nice green M&M behind you.
That's right. For sale. Go on my eBay page. You can have
You can buy that
if you want to buy
kind
it.
of disconcerting looking.
1992 vintage. I won't say one of a kind, but extremely rare. Not kidding. It's extremely rare, this thing. So
if you want a green M&M that might make you uncomfortable with its eye contact during this live stream, go find it. I'm obviously recording from a prison with a decently nice looking chair. They are recording in a corporate HR office, I guess.
that is that is the vibe. We've talked about this, right? That TGC has become very corporatized. And with that, there's even, think about the aesthetics. Oh, look, I see we have a comment about the aesthetics, but yeah, think about the aesthetics of that intro, by the way. Not just the video, but just the intro. Just imagine listening to that. Who's listening to that? Who's it for? That is a very soft and corporatized introduction. Doesn't make it wrong.
Right.
Doesn't make it wrong. That's just an aesthetic point.
Coalition podcast. My name is Colin Hanson. I serve as the editor-in-chief of the Gospel Coalition, and we've got a very exciting topic today: partners in ministry, how men and women can labor together.
Does he sound excited? Colin Hanson, love to have you on the show. I know that's never ever going to happen, but I don't know.
Can't wait for this.
For the good of the church. I'm excited about this conversation in part because you often hear about the problems or the limitations, but we're going to be talking especially about the positives, about encouragements and ways that we see God working well between men and women in the church today. I'm joined by some good friends here. Would you guys go ahead, Jen, start with us, introduce yourself, and just keep going around.
I'm Jen Wilkin, and I'm an author and Bible teacher and have served in the local church nigh on these many long years.
Last time Jen Wilkin joined us here on the podcast, by that I mean us reacting to her, was her passionately arguing that Christians need to put their children in the public school. So we only have room for more agreement this time with their that's the biggest problem.
Four score.
My name is Corey Porter. I work in background in campus ministry, and right now in nonprofit life.
I'm Mike Kruger. I'm president and professor of New Testament at Reformed Theological Seminary in Charlotte, North Carolina.
No longer. He's just pivoted out of that role.
Oh,
there are many
things this week, I think. Pivoted out of that role. I don't know what he's doing. I don't remember. I don't think I read the whole statement about if he knows what he's doing now, but I think he's pivoting away from that role.
Things that we all share in common. There are ways that we would be different from each other as well. But one of the areas that we share in common within the Gospel Coalition is sharing a broad complementarian perspective that the office of pastor and elder is reserved for qualified men. And at the same time,
so again, Pastor Michael, this is our yearly moment to point this out, that complementarianism, as described by Colin Hanson, and as was described by Don Carson and Tim Keller before him, and is described widely this way, that what it means to be complementarian is that the office of pastor is reserved for qualified men. And Colin Hanson underlined qualified, which is fine. In that,
because he has to, by the way, because not, I don't mean that he actually has to, but in this circumstance and in that setting, in the TGC type setting, you always have to qualify anything that is pushing in any way against modern egalitarianism. You have to. right? That's part of the rules. It's unspoken rules usually. But you always have to be apologetic when you're moving in that direction.
Because complementarianism itself, historically, is essentially an apologetic in the face of egalitarianism and feminism.
Yeah, it's
and
built
right,
around, we've talked about this a lot.
yes,
It is defined by feminism, right? Which is why inevitably those who consider themselves complementarian over time have inevitably continued to drift more and more egalitarian, right? That you have all these, complementarians, men and women are different. And then it's like, oh, but of course women should be on the front line of the military.
right.
We wouldn't doubt that. Are they? What if they're good at that job?
Because it's because the complementarian project, which we can be thankful for,
Yep.
to a degree, was we must defend the 2 or 3 verses on what the New Testament says about, specifically about the pastor being an elder, being a male only office, and usually, obviously, in relation to marriage, Ephesians 5, husbands head wives in a role of submission in terms of marriage. And so all they defend is that. And so what it does is, of course, when there's no verse about should women be on the front lines of battle, so I guess, if they want to,
them, right? That's up to us.
that's not one of the verses we have to defend.
Yeah, women should be police officers, right? How could you even ever say that they weren't? Remember when John Piper got all this flack, even from, so-called complementarians, for saying, yeah, women shouldn't be police officers.
Right.
Women shouldn't be the ones that have to confront violence in society.
Right. And so we are, and so the other thing is the other reason complementarianism in this form is a failure is it has now defined gender in terms of this unifocal thing, the office of pastor.
Yep.
Who gets the office of pastor is what it means to be a man or woman. And so
what could go wrong?
Exactly. And so it is not in that women, you are the book I'm reading for Restless, which maybe you're reading if you already owned it and hadn't read it, Anthony Esselin's Out of the Ashes, he describes needing to reclaim a vision for men and women. And it is a beautiful, holistic view of what it means to be a man and woman that have such high dignity, but are very distinct.
Yep. And it's right, a positive vision, right?
A positive vision.
Not, hey, you can't do this. You
get to do this.
But then everything else is free game. This is what you're for. This is your telos.
Yes. And out of that, you realize God's reasoning for the way he ordered the church and marriage fits with the good nature he built into men and women. And so it gives you a much greater thing to want to feast on. The idea that you would talk to your boys and girls and say, now, boys, someday you can be a pastor. Girls, I love you. You can't be a pastor. I've just taught you what it means to be a man and a woman, right? Is an insane idea.
It's so insane.
But that becomes the focus, because the only thing we're doing in complementarianism is defending the verse. So if we're going to do something for the next generation, Colin Hansen, we need to actually push further. We can say, thank God for Don Carson and John Piper and Andreas Kostenberger and these men who defended the verse when it was being attacked. And now it's time to be men and women.
Let's take more ground, right?
Yes.
It's okay. The defense, it was necessary in certain quarters because a lot of ground had been given away.
Yep.
But now that there's been some stop to that, maybe, right? We could debate that, I guess. But there does seem to be, right? I mean, amongst guys our age and younger, there is a much stronger sense of what men and women are for. There's a much greater, consistency, I think, on those points, a much deeper, even I would almost say a much deeper understanding. I'm not trying to be in any way disrespectful toward those who have gone before us, but a deeper understanding in that we didn't have to refight those battles. We just move forward to, okay, now what are men and women for? right? What's their purpose? Why did God make us different in these ways? And so there's been a kind of a reclaiming of a positive vision for men and women.
Yeah.
And so we can take more ground now, right? We can move forward beyond that simple idea that these verses mean something.
And I do think there is a difference. I think in the people that I work with that are younger than us in the church, right? So we'll say young millennials and Gen Z. I think in when I was in college, and maybe it's just because there was always kind of a pushback on these ideas and like, okay, so I actually need to kind of offer this apologetic and work through things. I find the younger you are, if you're in the church, the generally more open you are. Because I think I've probably said this on the podcast, I find Gen Z, they're kind of splitting. I do think there's a lot more open to these ideas that are maybe considered more what we would have called conservative or whatever.
Yep.
Because for those of them that are like, hey, everything doesn't work and it's broken, when you're like, hey, what if just getting married? What if these kinds of old ideas are what you should go? They go, well, everything we're doing wasn't working, so why not? I don't have anything to push back against it for. And then obviously the ones who would be very opposed deselect out. But I do think there's a great openness. I don't think it's the same.
Right.
And so I hope that's what they're going to do in this podcast, because they're speaking to the next generation. The next generation. Timely.
We all agree that the body of Christ functions best when all of its members are valued and encouraged to use their gift. Often these conversations are about what women can't do. Many of the denominational debates that we see are often focused on the things that women cannot do. And those can be important discussions, but we also want to continually affirm all the many, many things that God has called women to do in the church and alongside men. So I just want to start with the basic question of how would you make the case that the church...
So Pastor Michael has already said, they are going to say, the great place to start would be in Timothy and Titus, Paul's instructions to women of exactly where to start.
Gives great instruction, very direct, very clear, very practical, by the way, incredibly practical. Maybe not in terms of like, hey, like a program, right? Yeah. Hey, set this up, do it like this, but practical intent in terms of do this. Yes. This is what you should do.
And so once we've mastered that, there are probably a lot of other things we could talk about, but what a great place to start.
This is what I always say, by the way, when I talk to people. People will, ask, we recently talked a bit about, this discussion of deaconesses in the PCA and things like that. And almost every time that I've talked with people about this, and they're like, well, why not? Or what, how should we think about this? One of the things I say is, okay, when we start getting right the very clear positive commands, like older women train up the younger women in how to be lovers of their husbands and keepers of the home, right? When we really are doing well at that, maybe we can start discussing other things, right? Like maybe we can move on. What if we just started there?
Yeah.
And yet we always jump to, well, what's the cool next thing? What's the thing that would make us sound really cool to feminists, kind of?
Yeah.
That's kind of what I want to do.
Which obviously, if the other lesson you should have learned in all of those attempts, those things actually don't work at all. They don't gain you any favor.
Right.
That's a failing. I actually think the highly programized version of evangelicalism is actually going to, we'll see what they say, is part of the problem. Why isn't there a program,
of course,
for that?
Yeah, this is, let me say that too, because you already get the corporate vibe. This is very corporatized, and the churches that these people are a part of are probably very corporatized type churches.
Yes.
And what's it going to be? You're exactly right. The answer has to be some kind of thing that the church does as a special thing, right?
Right.
Instead of, what if there's organic relationships and discipleship amongst the members of the church? And then like the idea that it has to be like a church thing will almost definitely come up. But that makes a lot of assumptions about the nature of the church and what the church is for and what the church should be doing that I actually think goes far beyond. And part of the difficulty here is that we're all looking for fathers and mothers, right? The family across, like the family culture across the West is an absolute mess. There's a lot of us that grew up in very broken homes. And so we're searching for fathers and mothers in the church. But that's not actually what the church is supposed to provide. Now, you can have a kind of father and mother, right? This is why we can refer to each other in that way, like Paul talks about in 1 Timothy. But that it can never replace the natural family, just like the church can never replace the function of the state. And what often happens in these circles is there's an attempt to do just that. There's an attempt to make everything done by the church, and that's actually really unhealthy. And
even the kind of gospel growth we're looking for is things that happen in people, in their lives, not in programs or structures of the church. And so we often equate, we're doing it right because we've added a program or structure or a corporate thing.
We have 50 women at our women's Bible study thing, right?
But that has nothing to do with, is that woman growing as a wife? Is that woman growing as a daughter? Is the sin coming out in her life? Is she learning to share the gospel with her neighbor? Right? These are all things that happen in people that we just want to programatize. And so, we go, why aren't there more women program leading things? Why do these programs, why is that the model? So, all right, sorry. We got to get some of these chapter titles. I just want us to get to healthy family structures and a complementarian view. And here's one. This is the most corporate title I've ever heard in my life. Embodied church mothers and the influence of virtual spaces. That is the most mumbo jumbo. Man, gender specific
embodied church mothers.
And the influence of virtual spaces. Then we have gender specific spaces and their value.
Can we title, when we put this out in podcast form, we should title it Embodied Church Mothers or something like that. We got to include that in the title.
Okay. Yeah, we do have to find a way. Suggest in the comments below, friends.
Needs the ministry of women. And I thought, Mike, that we begin with you and just look at a historical perspective. One of the things that you teach and you're an expert in is the early church. Talk about that. Maybe even just bridge from the Bible. Some of the biblical examples are a little bit more well-known, but bridge from that into the early church.
Yeah, I mean, I'm excited about this conversation because even in a few hours from now, I'll be doing a whole talk on why we need women in ministry, and actually deals with a lot of the same issues here. And that whole talk is designed to be an encouragement along the same lines we're discussing here, which is that men and women need each other. And that is what complementarianism is about, right? So some people take complementarianism as a way of saying, let's separate men and women from each other in ministry. They don't really interact. I'm like, well, no, it's the opposite. We fit together. We need each other. And that's true from the very beginning. And it's true in the early church. As you noted, I've done a good bit of work on particularly second century Christianity. And I was rather shocked. In the academic space, you're not shocked by many things, but I thought I knew what was going on there. And I was shocked by just how many women were popping up in the historical sources all over the place. And in my talk this afternoon, I'll mention a bunch of them. But one example, in very early second century, as Christianity is spreading, some pagan governors, Pliny the Younger, is really upset about Christianity spreading. He's looking to find a couple of Christians to torture and find out what's really going on in these secret meetings. And we're told in the historical record that it's two women he finds. It's just very fascinating that the two people he picks to get more information about Christianity are women, because women were flocking to it in great numbers. So what you see in the very beginning is that in the early...
Man, yes, you can. Yes, you can.
This kind of stuff where they're trying to be so like, we include women too. But what does he say? I was shocked to find out that there were disciples in the early church that were women, right? There were believing women in the early church. I know that's not what he said. I know somebody that's watching this knows Dr. Kruger, and they're going to be like, look what these guys said.
Dr. Kruger, love to have you on the show. I think
isn't that what it sounds like, though?
I think
I can't believe it.
Michael Kruger, who edited the book, The Heresy of Orthodoxy, right? This in-depth study on like how orthodoxy came out of the early church period, in a period where there were all these this debate over, was it a lot of competing views and they just used Constantine to crush them, right? He gives this in-depth historical research to prove that wasn't how orthodoxy came to exist. Dr. Kruger, we all know you've done deeper research than what you just projected, and that's okay. You're giving a 1-minute clip on a podcast, but even what you just said, what was just said is, we need women in ministry. I agree. We need believing women in the church who are willing to be martyred if they were arrested. Yeah. And church history is full of women like 100%.
That. And by the way, most of church history is the accounts that we have. There are untold numbers of faithful women down through the history of the church that died full well knowing that they would probably never be talked about. It would never be a thing, right? They're not going to be remembered. There's not going to be statues. And they did it because they loved the Lord. Right. And that's awesome. Right. Like, praise God. But it is just to me, when I hear that, it sounds patronizing.
Yeah. Pliny the Younger wasn't saying, I need to find the greatest experts on the Christian faith. Finally, a woman who can teach me. That is not what he was doing. They were arresting people to torture for the sake of getting information and getting people to end Christ. Now, even the idea of how we're defining complementarianism, you do notice a shift. Complementarianism was men and women have different roles.
Yep.
Now it's men and women need each other.
Yeah. I mean, so complementarian, it was always, hey, there's a complementary vision, right? It was always like, well, we're not the patriarchalists that have a positive vision for men and women. we and we're not the feminists, right? We're the third way, right? That was always the idea, where these two things come together.
But they work together. But it wasn't, we need each other in ministry. It was a way of specifying differing roles.
Yes.
Because what he just did is, men and women need each other. That's what complementarianism means. It's not just men and women need each other. That is a generic statement. Egalitarians would affirm men and women need each other.
Right. It's a biological reality, right?
Exactly. It is in the specificity of the differing roles that would, as they would say, complement each other.
Yep.
All right. Let's keep going. I got to get back to our good view so people can see.
Early Christian church, women were involved in all kinds of exciting and positive ways. And I want to make sure we just keep that in mind as we think about those issues today.
Women today are, in my church and in Pastor Michael's church, are involved in all kinds of exciting and positive ways, just to be clear.
It does. That's when I say that it sounds patronizing, is it makes it sound like as if, we've never had women involved in church
in an exciting or positive way.
The known issue in churches for literally 200, 300, 400 years has been, we have so many women. We have so many eager women. We have so many women that are active in ministry of some sort, right? Like in the ministries of the church, wanting to be a part of these things, in service, whatever. Why don't we have the men? That's been the cry of the church for hundreds of years.
So much so that a man named Mark Driscoll literally became a famous sensation because he went, we're getting men to come to church. And everyone went, wait, what?
Yeah.
You have an abundance of men who want to lead your ministries?
Yes.
How? And the answers were mixed. How he did that was a mixed bag, admittedly. But that was what was notable.
Yeah, when I teach in cultural apologetics, one of the second
TM, by the way, all of those courses that you can sign up for on TGC are fantastically expensive, but TM, cultural apologetics
sessions that I lead, we focus on persecution in the early church and tell the story of Perpetua and Felicity, which was one of Augustine's favorite stories to go back to and tell.
There's a lot of female martyrs that people don't know about. Yeah,
exactly. So two of the more well-known ones there. Jen, I think we need to frame this as this contribution of women is essential. It's not just something that's nice to have. It's not just optional. It's not just sort of a bonus, but help us understand.
I guess we're going to find out what he means when Jen Wilkin answers. The contribution of women is essential. in my home, the contribution of my wife is essential, right? We were desperately sick for the last 2 weeks, and the period where my wife was too ill to be like contributing to our house was
It's
after
over.
it was
over.
like, dude, our life it is truly bad. Everybody help, and I had people who did help, but it is a strange statement.
Yeah.
It's just a strange statement.
Right. Well, and so they still haven't offered like an idea of what does it mean, like men and women together in ministry. What they've described so far, right? When you think about Perpetua, when you think about those that Kruger mentioned, what they've mentioned so far is just Christian discipleship.
Yeah,
right? It's just part of following Christ. In other words, it's not this is what it looks like to minister in the church. There hasn't been a positive vision. And yet they're talking as if there has been already.
Pastor Michael, we're only 30 minutes into this and my beer's out. So we'll see how well I do now that that's the case. But we're going to hear about healthy family structures and the complementarian view.
By describing what makes it essential. Like, you can't have a well-functioning local church unless you're seeing women contribute in these ways.
Well, I was actually sitting here ready to edit the title of this session already because it says how men and women can labor together, and I would change it to how they must. Because the contributions of women are sometimes viewed as being
bummer.
No,
dude. So Colin Hansen wrote a video title, and he got mommed. He got spiritually mothered to changing it by Jen Wilson.
But notably, if I remember right, I could be thinking about a different female debater in the TGC debates. But if I remember right, Jen Wilson was with the public school debate was also one of the ones that was regularly speaking about things in this way, right? Where it's everything becomes a must and constantly putting burdens on people that you have to be doing it this way. And we noted that at the time. I notice now that's the same thing here, right? It's, you left it open to the wisdom of a local group of like what this looks like. No, we must. Now, of course, it's just general still. We haven't explained it yet. But I did notice that once again.
I look forward to someone explaining to me what embodied motherhood and virtual spaces
as opposed to disembodied motherhood.
Nice, but not necessary. You think about in particular the things that happen in the all pink spaces. It's like, well, that's whatever they want to do over there. And I think in a lot of cases, the all female space can suffer from a benign neglect from church leadership, which is male, because it's like, well, we don't really understand what's happening there, and we're happy as long as the women are happy. It's not seen as a spiritual formation environment so much as it is just a place for women to gather. That would just be one example, but I think
that was.
I get it. So I don't think she's totally off base in this.
Great.
That very often women's groups in churches are not focused on true spiritual formation. But just on getting women together to chit chat and have fun together. I don't think that's probably wrong. But also the question is, well, is that the purpose of that group? This is something I've noticed, by the way, across the board. This is very common, where within the evangelical world, if you're doing something together, but it's not like a Bible study, well, it's not real. It's not helpful, right? It's interesting, isn't it, that when Paul says, here's the role of older women in the church, it's about lived virtue and practical service, not necessarily, hey, we should be doing in-depth Bible study together. Not that can't be being done, right? Everybody should know and study the Bible. That's good. But also that the primary way you should be knowing, learning, studying, and getting the Bible is from your pastor, right? As you sit under the preaching of the word, from the teaching times, whatever those may look like, from the elders of the church, and from if you're married, then for you as a woman, then also from your husband, ideally. And we could go into many cases why that might not happen, but it is like that's the biblical worldview operates around that idea. Yeah, you are getting all the spiritual nourishment you need. you should be, right? Like that, in those settings, you should probably be getting all the spiritual nourishment you need. And now go and serve and live in a way that glorifies God according to what you know, as it's been revealed and taught in his word. Right.
By the way,
And
shout out. We have more than 50 people on our live stream. I think that is the most
Yeah.
we've ever had. That's
yeah,
fun.
a bunch. We got a bunch on Twitter, looks
But-
like.
But Pastor Michael, I too agree with you. I do very little Bible teaching at our church that is not open to men and women.
Yeah.
For the instruction that I want to give.
Yep.
And that, again, the only thing that I'm sure, which is why Paul in married couples told women to ask their husbands, is I know the younger men in the church are often more ready to come and ask me further questions about things than the women, just for out of natural things. And I'm just I'm a prickly person, so I don't blame them for that. But yeah, I mean, again, she's describing programs. She doesn't like the programs. Would she like it better if the pastor said, I'm going to come and oversee all these programs? Would that be what is wanted? Or is there something else? Because that's the question.
We're seeing in the New Testament one another's is exactly that there should be interaction happening in ministry spaces between men and women. We shouldn't have things just parsed into two different categories.
Yeah, I know we keep stopping it. I feel bad. I don't feel that bad because we warned you. But the language of like we shouldn't have separated ministry spaces. What is that? What does that mean? What is a ministry space? You mean like the sanctuary of the church?
Right.
But also, can we also agree that after the experiment that has been feminism, egalitarianism, in almost every way, we've seen that education, learning, especially if we're talking about studies, right? If we're talking about there are other places, other ways that we might get together as members of the church. But if we're talking about like in-depth Bible study or something like that, we do know that, like, generally speaking, men and women tend to learn better, not necessarily in co-ed environments, or at least that's true of men. I don't know if that's actually true of women. I know that more and more studies are showing that's true of men and boys, that they generally are going to do better as far as education, right? Just learning, growing in knowledge where there aren't women around. And we all know that the dynamics of a group change significantly when it's co-ed, right? Where there's men and women together.
I definitely would love to have it, right? It would be an actually interesting discussion to have I mean, again, it's the most 2024. We're in 2025. The idea of like the gendered spaces, that is the most 2024. Goodbye. We voted that out. Like,
right. Trump's president.
We are unburdened by those ideas.
What was JD Vance's line? I don't care, Margaret.
But
right?
I just think the like, right. For example, boys and girls are like this, right? I don't know of a boy growing up like me that at one point didn't have a no girls allowed kind of thing. And it just tells you there's absolutely a place for gendered events, gendered spaces, gendered clubs. Now, obviously, the reason little boys it goes wrong is because they're immature, right? And you can do this in an immature and foolish way, which I would not encourage. And so it'd actually be an interesting thing to think about. We are here affirming women need pastors in their lives. And so I do think, again, the idea that the actually essential means of grace should be completely, quote unquote, ungendered. The access to my public teaching, the means of grace, the way we all worship together in the church is not age, is not gender. Like, none of those things come into it. But the idea that that is the only thing we need to know is just you're right. I guess maybe there isn't a singular verse about that, and so we don't have to defend it, but it seems apparent, right? It's like, you would have to tell me again, don't believe what your lying eyes tell you. Don't believe that men and women somewhat naturally in social settings gather to talk together, and that they even do different things in those social settings.
Yep.
Oh man, I hope we make it. We're 2 minutes from
about the way that
virtual
Jesus
and embodied
speaks
mother.
about the church when his mother and brothers come looking for him in the Gospels. He looks around at the people who are sitting under his teaching and says, "Who are my mother and my brothers and my sisters?" Anyone who does the will of the Father. So he describes the church as the family of God. And I worry that too often we have families in our local churches that if it was a nuclear family attending our church, we'd be very concerned about. We have a father who sets the rules. We have children who toe the line, and we have an absentee mother. So when we think about just a healthy family structure, we would expect that in our local churches, which are expressions of the family of God, that we would see fathers and mothers operating in that
I
space.
see you want to comment, but also we want to get there.
As you mentioned,
I mean, so this is a reductio ad absurdum. So when we're like, hey, everyone, just when we say things like, hey, the church isn't like the nuclear family, do you want to know why we say it? Because of this.
Yeah.
If your church doesn't function like a nuclear family, then there's something wrong. This is why we say that when the apostles say that the gospel creates a people that is supernatural, it is not replicating the natural. It is not replacing the natural. And even where the natural is broken and young men need and young women need people to offer and give them help that they weren't given in their natural families because of sin, because of brokenness, whatever, everyone knows. No one goes, well, the fact that all these men in the church have taken me under my wing, it doesn't hurt that my dad doesn't care anymore.
Right.
Everyone knows that's not.
It doesn't take that away.
It doesn't take that away. You're given a unique supernatural gift. Because the problem is then what you do is you say the church must function like the family. So you must have people over in your home and treat them the way you would treat your family. That's wrong, because you actually aren't allowed to treat your own family like you would the church. Because if my family, for example, I'll use me as a church officer, if I have family members, blood members of my family who do not confess Christ, I must not commune them. My loyalty to God and his people now in that setting must trump my family tie that is real. But when we say, well, they're the same, but this isn't even how the Bible does it. Paul, what does he say? If you don't provide for your own family, you're worse than a non-believer. Paul, when he talks about doing well to the church, he says, we should do well to all, especially the household of God. Paul has said the way you act towards your family, they're just different things. And Christ's teaching of announcing who is truly with the Messiah, that the Messiah is those who are on the side and in the household of the Messiah are not by bloodline. Jesus does not say, well, you know what? Now I've got a mother in the Messiah. Jesus doesn't get a woman to serve alongside of him, right? He only takes 12 sons, right? That's not what Jesus is doing. And again, the problem is the church is full. All the churches have absentee mothers. But the problem everyone says that the church has is that no man cares about his family's spirituality. that women so often are the spiritually attuned ones.
Yeah, I really think, by the way, that one of the problems so far has just been that there has been no definition
Right.
of what we're even talking about.
Yeah, I mean, again, as we all know, I'm in a mood, so I'm not reading this in the most charitable thing. You could describe a situation where I could come up with a situation that describes a problem that would sound like what she's saying. Sure. So if we're not going to define anything, there's a reason.
We would all agree at this table that the role of pastor elder is reserved for qualified men. But what we often see in local church expressions is something that we would be concerned about if we saw just an actual family that operated along those lines.
I'll add something to that if I can, because I think the familial analogy is such a great illustration of what we're talking about here. You mentioned, Jen, you got a sort of
it's not a great, so far hasn't been a great analogy.
A very prominent father and an absentee mother as an analogy of the church. I would say there's another analogy you could use here, is that we wouldn't want sort of normal families to have two fathers and no mothers.
Right.
Or two mothers and no fathers. In fact, we've been seeing this in our society for years, and we're like, no, families need both the father and a mother to have the right balance and perspective. Well, that's also true in the church, right? Because we're a big family. So, whether it's a father that's prominent and a mother that's absent, but also you don't want a church that's only fathers. Because
what is he talking about? We are two embodied mothers and the influence of virtual spaces. What could he possibly mean by that analogy? He just described a problem of church leadership as a model of gay marriage. Everybody, let me take it out of the good seminary speech. What could that mean? I don't know.
I think it's interesting to think about.
God made Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve in church leadership. Jesus has a bride.
Yeah.
The only possible analogy is that the church is not to play the role of man with Jesus, which means we submit to him.
I was thinking the same thing, that it just seems like what we're doing is we're doing a lot of mixing of analogies.
I'm a graduate of RTS.
And because there's not been any clear definition of what we're talking about. What are the parameters of what we're discussing? We've talked about is that men and women should be involved together in ministry spaces, which means nothing.
And I literally don't know what he just meant. I don't have an idea.
But also, so think about the analogies of Scripture. Yes, Timothy, for instance, is told to act toward the older women in the church as mothers, older men as fathers, younger women as sisters, younger men as brothers. Right. So there is that element of this is how they're supposed to. You're supposed to kind of act toward somebody. But when it talks about the ministry of the church, right, throughout Scripture, the ministry, when we think about the ministry of the church, formally speaking, I'm not talking about, hey, is this member discipling somebody? I'm talking about the formal ministry of the church. Who are the fathers and mothers? Well, obviously the elders, right, the apostles, the men who are leading the church are the fathers. How does Paul also speak about himself? Like a mother.
Right.
Like he also speaks of himself as a mother for these churches. And so again, it's just a weird meshing and breaking down of analogies that we haven't clearly defined the biblical parameters for what we're discussing.
If the point is so general as this charitable commenter has described, by the way, thankful for my RTS education. Please don't disavow me RTS along the way. I think what he's saying is that you can't have a church full of solely spiritual mothers or solely spiritual fathers. You need both, right? That's possible. And again, if that is the point, it's such a generic point that you need mature men and women. Like, it is so generic that it is
right. There's going to be men and women will follow Christ, of course, right? Nobody's ever said this.
No one's arguing with that.
And the reason why we have to discuss it is why because we're not talking about just men and women in the church. We're not talking about men and women following Christ. We're talking about women need to be prominent teachers and leaders in the church. That's where they're trying to move this. 100%, that's where it's going. They may not even realize that's what they're doing, but that's absolutely where this discussion is going and where it's trying to take you.
Well, we have made it to embodied church mothers and influence of virtual spaces.
I'm gonna start using that as a diss, by the way. Like, quit being such an embodied church mother.
Because you end up with another imbalance there. So I think that familial analogy is key.
It's key.
Often I feel like the case for women in the church has seemed more to be, like you said, like what we cannot do versus what we can do. But when I was going to seminary, what I realized was in the garden, how beautiful it is that I was taught under being Glad. Dr. Glad does a great job of explaining that the temple aspect of the garden and how we were put in together as co-laborers, right? And the first time we ever hear God's eternal voice say out amongst his creation, it is not good, is in the absence of woman, right? And so what does that mean? It means that both male and female together partnering expresses the full image of God in the ministry or in the temple. And so we are the church, the temple here on earth today. We want to.
And let me just make one moment. Do you want to know how we can all express God's image in the church today? Let's all get together and sing psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs. Let's encourage each other while the day is still here. Let's confess our sins one to another. Come to the table as brothers and sisters feasting in God's house. Obviously, what we are talking about is programs and making people prominent.
And visibility.
Platforms.
Right? This is what we talk about, right? There needs to be
spaces and platforms. By the way, goodbye 2024 terms. I am calling Doge to take those terms away from everyone.
We need Doge to investigate TGC if it still exists after USAID funding is taken
Who are
away.
you platforming is a thing. Never again. Like, no.
We should just start a list of these words. We don't use these anymore.
Who did God platform in the garden? Like, I don't want any of that.
To express that fullness of God, of us co-laboring together. So I do think that it's essential. The case, I think, is authored by God, established by God, and then shows itself throughout redemptive history and even branching out into, as he said, the second century church today.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that the solution to Adam's aloneness is not an elder board. It's a woman. So
because happy Valentine's Day. I don't want to be married to an elder board. I don't want to be married to Pastor Michael.
Shout out to my wife, Emily.
Dedicated to Emily. I'll shout it out to my wife. It is not good for me to be without Amy Klein, my wife. Of course, God. Oh, there's never been like a single man being alone and like, Lord Jesus Christ, I'm asking you to provide me a board of men. That is what. No, he asked for a wife.
Yes. No, it's just so infuriating because either there's a disingenuous nature to what's being said, or you're platforming people who literally don't understand that there is a difference between the sphere of the family, of marriage, and the church.
Right. And obviously using the garden, the example of the garden where likely the church and the family and the state were literally only existing in two people and in an idyllic paradise.
Right. And the head of each of those, by the way, was what?
Yeah.
The prominent head of each of those was what? It was
Adam.
The man Adam, the man, right? Man himself. And so this, even the language of speaking about the garden in terms of, co-laborers and doing it all together. That's not actually the best way to speak about the nature of the garden. But not because anybody's saying, well, woman wasn't involved in the work of the garden. No, there are aspects to the creation mandate that would not be possible apart from woman, right? Like these things have, like man and woman, yes, have to work together for the creation mandate to be
That's right.
accomplished. Yes.
It's interesting. What does Adam name his wife? He names her woman to be platformed in a future speaking. He calls her life giver.
Yeah.
Because the truly like mind-blowingly amazing thing about women is they make people, both biologically, emotionally. Like when my family was sick and my wife wasn't there, we were like, oh no, the person who's good at people is gone. We are in trouble. Help!
What do we do?
I need an elder board. No, that's not what I said. That's what I say as a church planter when I go to church. I say, Lord, I need an elder board. At my house, I go, where's my wife? Someone said this is so vague, there's nothing to argue against. I think we've found plenty to argue against, despite how hard they've tried to not let us.
Oh man, it's so bad.
And I'm not saying, that it isn't important for us to have elder boards, but
I mean, you kind of were, but
a little.
Yeah, I think we see I think the problem that you run into when the family of God is essentially motherless is not that women stop looking for a mother. They go and find a mother outside of the local church in the form of someone who they can find in a virtual space. And I think sometimes what I wish more church leaders understood was that when you reach that moment, you actually have no idea which voices these women are being influenced by. I'm one of them. I hope I'm a credible, remote church mother, but I can't be an embodied church mother for the women in your church, which is also not to say that the only benefit of having embodied church mothers is for the women in your church in the same way.
So her whole point here is that people, again, it's like, welcome to 2025. Women listen to women's podcasts on the internet about things they care about, from faith to whatever other interests. Also true about men. I don't care. The men in your church, just as much as the women in your church, listen to podcasts about life, politics, faith, all of these things. And it's true. You don't really know who they're all listening to. Now, I mean, no, I won't go there. Sorry. That's a different can of worms I'm not going to open right now, but that is what happens. You're right. And you're right that because of the broken family structures, people are always looking for mentor, mother, father type figures. It's true. And it's hard. And part of the hard thing is when you are one of the mature women in your church, you are likely almost overwhelmed by the amount of women that are like, will you please do these? Can we have a program of you being my new person? Same with men, right? I don't know. It's just a weird thing. It's just again, the embodied mothers versus the virtual spaces. Shouldn't we just be actually thankful, as we were in the YRR, knowing the limitations, but thankful that there are faithful, that you can find someone that I can go online and I can listen to teaching that may have been difficult for me to acquire in my local community? Is this actually a good thing?
It can definitely be a good thing. Also, by the way, do some women get into, like, they're listening to really crazy stuff? Yeah, of course, right? Like that absolutely happens, just like it does with men. Yeah, like there's crazy stuff on the internet. Okay, like it's gonna be that way. But also, what are a lot of women looking for? Right? What are some tips on, like, keeping the home? What are some ways to, like, be a good wife to my husband and support him? What do I do when my kids, like, have this kind of allergy and now I need to cook a different way and I don't really know how, and I never really learned how to cook in the first place?
Yeah.
Right? Like, it's actually, believe it or not, the vast majority of the stuff is not wow, why can't I get like a seminary degree online
Right.
from a woman? Like it's just not the normal stuff. Maybe there's a couple people out there doing that, but it's not normal. Right. That's not the average woman. They're looking for practical, helpful things. And they're probably like watching videos where there's like this dream of, we could have a farm someday, or like funny memes about moms and kids. Like, that's it. That's what you got. A lot of it.
Ladies, you can let us know in the comments if Pastor Michael has correctly diagnosed your internet habits.
I do share a Facebook algorithm with my wife, and so I get to see a lot of it.
All right, we have 10 minutes. We will see if we can make it to the end of the Embodied.
That in the home, a mother has an important influence on sons. We need to have visible church mothers functioning in the local church.
I guess it wasn't the solution to Adam, but it was kind of the solution to Moses's problems. The plurality.
But you know what's interesting?
Oh, Colin Hansen. Hansen. Getting spicy here.
She's
so
coming
wait,
back,
Colin Hansen, I know she's we'll listen, but Colin Hansen, when Moses had a problem in the congregation of Israel, the congregation of God, Lord, I cannot bear these people alone.
Bring Zipporah. Why haven't you put Zipporah up on the church website then?
I will go ask Jethro. Go find some men who can actually do this thing.
Yeah.
Oh, thank God that they can be given a portion of the Spirit with me. Colin Hansen, I like.
Marriage and ministry in the church are not the same thing.
I like it, Colin.
But can we just admit that generally speaking, women are going to look at ministry in the church through the interpersonal lens that they look at something like marriage? Right? Yes.
I'm taking a moment to just celebrate Colin Hansen, just being like, well, if we use a closer biblical analogy to the church, the solution actually would be an elder board. But he's about to be, we really paused.
That's a great meme right there.
It really is. What is this laughing man about? Don't laugh. Don't laugh, Colin.
Go ahead.
Is that in Exodus 18, do you know what his father-in-law says to him? He says, this thing you're doing is not good. And then he gives him helpers. And so it's actually a parallel, I think, to the Genesis account.
Well, let's go back to an area that.
In what way? Other than we. In what way is it parallel?
It says not good. It says it was not good.
The things were not good. That in the people of God, things were not good. There is no parallel. There's not a parallel that maybe it was.
I'm not against that being a parallel, but it doesn't then mean like the way biblical.
It's not a parallel in gender.
Yes, exactly. The way that you read biblical parallels in language is not by conflating stories and biblical imagery and analogies, right? That is a recipe for cultic disaster. Okay. Right. That is a recipe for the biggest mess in the relationships between men and women that you could imagine, right? That's a horrible idea.
That you and I've talked about, Jen, offline, different areas, and I think it undergirds a lot of this conversation. When we look back on the biblical narrative, going back to Genesis, do we see the similarities between men and women emphasized, or their differences emphasized? Want to jump in here?
Well, I mean, we see both.
We see their differences emphasized, just to be pretty clear, that it is their differences that allow them together to fulfill the creation mandate and allow humanity to propagate and be the image of God on earth. That is just, I don't know. Do not know. And then when Paul refers to the creation accounts, he refers to men and women's differences over and over again. So just to be clear, the creation account is almost clearly their differences, other than that men and women together are the image of God.
Well, the whole point is the Genesis account, right? It's the separation of these things and then bringing them together.
Right.
But it is the separation of different kinds, different things, and then bringing them together in such a way that life is possible.
That is that God shows his beautiful harmony in the diversity of things.
Yeah.
both, but I
Sure.
think it matters the order in which we see them. And even as recently as a few months ago, I saw an article that was written that talked about how Genesis chapter 2 is showing us this beautiful picture of male-female difference. But if you look at what Genesis chapter 2 is doing, basically Adam is shown a parade of animals that go in front of him who have been each created according to its kind. And so I actually have a secret pet theory that that's potentially the animals going by two, as they will in another section in
Right, yeah.
Genesis,
Right.
because he
Maybe.
looks on them, and every time an animal goes by and he's giving them names, he's basically categorizing them. He's thinking that one's not like me. That one's not according to my kind, not according to my kind. And then when Eve is created, he sings a hymn to sameness. He says, bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh.
He sings a hymn
she should
to sameness.
No, he doesn't, as Michael Kruger has made clear, because he would not have sang that same hymn if a man had popped out of his rib.
Right. So it's not about sameness in that way. It's like me, but also different. And he also names Eve,
That's right.
like he names the other animals.
A suitable helper has been made for me. That's what was made. Which as I have emphasized in my own home and in my own life in the last week and a half,
Like, praise God.
I could not be more in agreement. I could not have I could not be praised. I shouldn't be in a mood. I should be praising God. My wife is upstairs with my children. Like that's how happy I should be.
Why isn't she on this podcast, Matt?
I know. Great
Matt,
question.
why aren't our wives running this podcast?
That's right. Because they'd hate it. There it is.
They would.
Oh.
called Isha because she came from Ish. In other words, she shall be like me because she came from me. And so when we don't start with
She will be named after man.
what we share, we have a tendency to over focus on difference. And anytime you over focus on difference,
Do you think that's TGC's problem? Just to ask this question.
Not just TGC.
Do you think TGC's big problem is, it's men and women so different. Men are from Mars, women are from Venus. That's the general vibe at TGC, where they have a podcast with exactly two men, exactly two women. Is that really what the tendency is?
Right. And is that the tendency of the culture, like the culture that we're in right now? Is it thinking too much of the differences between men and women and their respective duties because of those differences? No, we live in a time of such androgyny when everybody's been told we're all the same. Everybody's the same. There's not really any difference. That's what we are in the midst of, right? And maybe you could say there's 10 guys out there that take the differences a little too far.
That's right.
Right. But probably nobody that's sitting at that table has met them. Right? Like that's not the world that we're actually in.
Right. We need spiritual mothers. Why? Because we don't know. We don't understand the difference. The only reason we would need spiritual mothers and fathers is because they're different.
Yeah.
Sorry, the point, like you've either given up the point, right? This is something that, like, if you had a warmth where people were being brought out in these characters, it would be so attractive because people are so confused, right? Matt Walsh made a groundbreaking documentary called What is a Woman?
Yeah.
And that's kind of a hard one to answer.
Right. Well, and even talking about that, the idea that there's no positive vision, even in the midst of this like weird, like, egalitarianism and everything that's taken over for the last 50, 60 years, you still have a somewhat of a vision of what men are for, right? Like there's still a sense of, yeah, women are like, hey, we should be just like men, but also I don't want to marry a man that's like me, right? Like I still am going to self-select for a man that is extremely confident, makes a lot more money than me, is taller than me and stronger than me, because that's what I'm attracted to, right? That's what you're going to be attracted to. So like that,
which ironically, right, the traditional family structure, this kind of thing Pastor Michael described, right? It's that old study they did that the liberal people who argue against it actually just have that family structure.
Yep. Right. They have the same because you can't get away from it. And there was that video going around of the guy mock interviewing people. They didn't know he was making a joke, but he was interviewing people at the DNC, and he was talking to women at the DNC, and they were basically like, Republican guys are hotter, right? Why? Well, because they're like, all the guys here are not masculine.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying, like, beyond just to push that point a little bit further, and now I'm losing train of my thought. I don't remember what I was going to say, but what were we talking about?
We were talking about how you were talking about how while there's still some kind of a sense of masculinity,
there is somewhat of a positive vision for men, even if it's a mess, even if it's not good, even if men, when they try to live up to that, are constantly crushed down by the feminist society that they're raised in. There's still somewhat of a positive vision. You know where there's not any positive vision at all is for women, right? And the idea that the way that you get that positive vision is by women visibly leading at the front of the church, right? Like, they're listed
representation, another 2024 word. I will be unburdened by.
Yes, get it out of here.
Yep.
Get it out of here. But that is the idea. Like, well, as long as there's women that went to seminary and our good Bible teachers are up front, that's going to teach women what to be. Do you know what? Every single time that happens, what it teaches women to be?
Right.
To be men.
Right.
In the church, right? Like,
again,
that's
like,
what it teaches them.
The idea that we've lived in a time where women would feel uncomfortable just being a stay-at-home mom, or dare I say, even just a stay-at-home wife. Like that's like a, whoa, are you really being productive? Are you really doing enough? Are you really, that is like something that I know, because I'm married to a woman, I know women feel that kind of pressure.
Like, I can't do that.
Yeah, like that. Oh, maybe I shouldn't do that.
And by the way, women aren't supposed to be lazy, and
that's not, which is not what I'm saying.
Moms are, right? But and so sometimes that feeling comes out of that, though. It comes out of like, well, I'm not really doing anything. Hey, there's a lot of things you could be doing, right? Like, there's a lot to do,
but there's a lack of awareness of what you could be doing.
Yes,
because the only thing we've valued is, well, because again, it's program corporate.
It's all corporate.
You making $1?
Yep.
If you're making dollars, you're valuable.
Right.
So, all right, we're going to wrap up here in like about 5 to 10 minutes, everybody, but let's see if we can get to the end of the virtual spaces. This virtual space you're sharing with me.
You're going to push people away. You're going to objectify people. This is what happens in other settings where I look at you and say, we have nothing in common. It's easier for me to push you down, to see you as just completely other than me. And the cultural narrative is men are from Mars, women are from Venus.
That was the cultural narrative in 1975, just to be clear.
The Genesis narrative is men are from the same garden created by the same God, tasked with the same cultural mandate and made in the image of God together. So
actually, could we just add what the Genesis account actually says, which is women are made from man. And what does Paul say? Therefore, for man, right? Like that there's a directionality, a telos within women that's directed toward man in a way that's not actually true of Adam, who was made from the ground, right?
Imagine going into a premarital setting, like that, right, where this joke used to be men are from Mars, women are from Venus. Imagine going into a premarital setting saying, here's what I just want you guys to know. You guys are going to think about things the same way. You have the same perspective. Husband, the way you're thinking about this relationship, it's pretty much the same. Just so you know, that's what I want you to know. The same.
Yeah.
Everyone would be like, wow, you are like a monstrously stupid premarital counselor. Of course you are. Because it's the similarities are clear. The similarities are women aren't dogs, men aren't, right? We are the same species.
Right.
But the differences in marriage in these things are where we have to understand of actually the good use. Yeah. Right. hey, the fact that your wife thinks differently about you, about all of these things, virtually all of these things, like she were from a different planet, to use a joke, is actually good. The way she thinks about these things is not always right, but is actually, you need to experience the way she thinks about these things.
Yep.
Otherwise, you should just get an elder board and you guys can all just, right? You don't like, it's crazy, but it is obviously also like, well, when the men get together and they're playing 3-on-3 basketball, it's like, well, our game wouldn't be better. Like our play wouldn't improve if we let a woman play in this. Our hunting party wouldn't improve because they're different things.
Yeah.
They're just different.
Matter. And in a day and age where differences are what are under attack, it's understandable.
What day and age do you live in? I don't know.
Well, she's saying that the differences are under attack, which is true, right? That's what we said. But what she's about to say is, but we're going to go too far then the other direction.
About them. But when we lose sight of sameness as the starting point, I think we devalue women in that conversation.
I think Jenny highlighted.
Here it is, guys. Anytime you hear somebody talk about this, where it's like, well, if women are not up front leading in the church, they are devalued. What is the underlying assumption? That value comes from being the person that's up front, right? Value comes from being a man. That's what they're saying, right? That's the underlying assumption that they're arguing from. I don't think any of them usually realize that, but that is the assumption that they're making. And the inevitable conclusion is not going to be complementarianism. The inevitable conclusion is not going to be, oh, well, we'll just make these lines at the pulpit, but everything else is fine, and we'll be really clear about the differences between men and women. No, the inevitable conclusion is, oh, I guess the feminists were right all along. That's where this is going every single time. That's where this is going.
This idea of this, even the idea of that what is in up front is what is important.
Yeah.
Of course the problem, right? This is the opposite of the Christ-like attitude. That Jesus, the servant of all, the going lower, is what is important.
Yeah. But it makes sense in the context of conference Christianity, TGC. Yes. We're known published authors. We have this at our church in Texas. It's this big performance, and you're up on stage and you're putting on this big show all the time. Actually, it makes sense in that kind of a culture that you would think, oh, what matters is being up front, because that's everything that you're taught. The whole of the medium that the church is operating with is teaching you what matters is being in the spotlight. And so what you're going to seek is being in the spotlight. And when you see that there's less women in the spotlight, you'll say, wait a minute, that's not right. If value comes from being in the spotlight, then men and women are both valuable. Therefore, they should both be in the spotlight. But that's not the point. It's that your whole church system is a total mess.
Well, everybody, Pastor Michael is right. I could add on, but that's a great place to leave it. What the ecclesiology matters. And we'd like to thank everyone who's joined with us live on YouTube and X. I do believe in about 2 weeks, at the beginning of what some people call Lent, we will be doing a live stream about giving up Ortho Bros for Lent. So we'll be reacting to some classic clips there. Please let us know, comment on this video if you would like us to continue to react to this. There's a lot more left. I don't know what they're going to say. I hope this was helpful. I hope this encouraged you to do more than try and get the spotlight. I hope you will follow the show. You'll buy the soap. You'll do all the good things. Be a good guy. This is 2025, everybody. This is 2025. Don't worry. Be happy. I'm going into the weekend better than I thought I could.